Just okay. Now, Janice, how do you want to be introduced now?
Janice Mathis, General Counsel to the National Council of Negro Women.
Okay. Okay. Let me start this again. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. We are here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. I want you to meet my morning stars, the Santita Jackson Morning Stars, on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. It's had a lot of great conversations every Monday through Friday, 6 to 8 a.m., and the conversation should be equally compelling today. Please meet me on the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. We have a lot to say over there too. Please don't go to my landing page, not the Santita Jackson page. Oh no, oh no, oh no. That is not where I can take on any friends. I can add you to my growing family of friends on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. Please meet me there. And if you should take a notion, if you go online, please, you can stream us also at am950radio.com, the voice of progressive Minnesota in Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's a joy to be with you today. In election 2024, here we are. Here we are. We basically have a nominee for the Republican Party, a nominee for the Democratic Party. The Republican nominee presumptive is former President Donald Trump. The Democratic nominee presumptive is President Joe Biden. Who will win? What will Robert Kennedy do? He's polling from strength to strength in the 20s, and he continues to gain more strength in terms of his poll numbers, and he's getting on more ballots. What will that mean? When people hear Dr. Cornel West, they're inclined to vote for him as well, to support him. More and more Americans are willing to step out on the proverbial limb, if you will, politically. That's just the way it's working out, everybody. So what's going to happen, and what should the asks be? What should the asks be? What are the needs of the American people? We've been looking at Gaza, and we should. We've not been looking at Haiti enough, but we should. We've not really been looking at the economy the way that we ought to, because Americans are struggling from payday to Monday, if they can get that far. We're looking at healthcare costs. The number one driver of bankruptcies in America today is your healthcare bill. Don't get sick, everybody. I mean, just a little bit sick. And you can be taken under by that. And the issues mount more and more every day. But there are the intransigent issues of racism in America, of classism, just generally speaking, but racism and sexism. The problems that just won't go away as we're watching DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs getting wiped off the map, not just in Florida, but they're being wiped off the map all over the country. And that is happening in the shadow of the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, who had been on a decades-long march to gut the Voting Rights Act. It was something that really disturbed him, and he wrote it in a memo in 1981 when he was clerking for Justice William Rehnquist on the U.S. Supreme Court. When he finally got to the Supreme Court and became the Chief Justice, he said, look, America is not racist the way it was. We don't need the Voting Rights Act. And yet, voter suppression and really the blocking of access to the ballot for more and more Americans, particularly Black and brown people, persists today. So my question is, do we need special protections as we go into this voting season? What do we need? What should the asks be? Not just the asks, what should the demands, what should the requirements be? The Jewish community has some red lines, and you don't cross them if you want their support. And people are obedient to that. White women have some red lines that you do not cross. And if you want their support, you're obedient to them. But somehow or another, when Black people in particular get in the mix, after we give you the support, we're told to wait. And then you have another George Floyd, and then you have a Trayvon Martin. And that's just on that side of things. You're watching DEI wiped out. There's that. And on and on and on and on and on. So we've got a tremendous panel to talk to us about this today. We've got attorney Mark Fancher, brilliant civil libertarian and author from the National Conference of Black Lawyers. We have got attorney Janice Mathis, someone I've known a long, long time. She's like my big sister. Indeed, she was vice president of Rainbow Push, but now she's the general counsel for the National Council of Negro Women. Of course, we can't help but think of the iconic Dorothy Height, and thank God for her and Mary McLeod Bethune for giving us his gift of that organization. But let's start with you, Wisconsin State Representative Lakeisha Myers. You've also been a teacher, so you understand the challenges that we have in education, the monies that we need, the monies we don't get. But now, as a legislator, you're also in the very interesting business of watching state contracts and local contracts. I was riding down the street on Sunday through the black neighborhood, the 75th Street, 79th Street, 87th, 83rd Street. These were business corridors that were teeming with people when I was growing up. You had Independence Bank in Chicago, the largest black bank in the country. You had Johnson Publishing Company, you had Johnson Products. Then you had Soft Shade, Seaway Bank, Supreme Life. I mean, we had it going on. Now all that's gone. Not likely to return anytime soon. So do people of color and blacks in particular need special protections, just given your experience in government? State Representative Myers.
Given my experience in government, I would say yes, we do still need those protections that were created for us, especially when you look at a historical perspective of this country. Yes, we still need them. You still need the Voting Rights Act and even the pre-clearance that was kind of stripped away with the Shelby v. Holder. So some of those things that went away, I think we still need those. I think we also need all of the formats of DEI as they've, happened over time. A couple weeks ago on the assembly floor, we were arguing about DEI in the state of Wisconsin. And my colleagues were saying, well, I think we've had enough of that. It's time to do things, and make everybody equal, because they have a real issue with the word equity. They don't want equity. They were like, if everything is just equal. But I said, when has it ever been equal? The reason you had a lot of programming and DEI, affirmative action, all these other things were because we understood them to not be equal. I think that's something that you have to look at, especially when you look at government contracts, with understanding who gets access and opportunity. How is it that a lot of Black contractors will often always be, subprime contractors on a government entity, but they can never be the prime contractor? The fact that they only get a small piece of the pie, even though they may be a hometown company, and other companies from outside of the area can come in and get 75, 80% of a contract. The fact that we even have prevailing wage in the state of Wisconsin is not like Illinois, where you still have, we're right to work, where you no longer have a prevailing wage, where there's a minimum that you have to pay folks on construction contracts anymore. Those things take a toll on communities that were already trying to break through a lot of the policies and programs that exist. So I agree, me and Emmett Smith don't agree with each other all the time, but when he talked about these Black student athletes trying to find another place to go play and to have the opportunity, go to an HBCU. That's the first thing I thought of. Go take your talents elsewhere, to a school that may actually get you to the graduation point, because a lot of times that's not the case when you look at how a lot of our student athletes are treated. So I know I went from like contracting to DEI to student athletes, but it all comes together when you look at the way in which how these programs were started and what they were utilized for. I think I put it simply like this, Santita. We had 246 years of chattel slavery in this country that was legal. And from 1865 to roughly 1965, and I'm being generous with that end date, that we had Jim Crow was the law of the land. And from, let's say, around about 1965 up until 2024, is that enough? That's enough time to have programs and policies in place that fall under the category of DEI. So about 60 years, a little bit less than 60 years, that's enough for you to make everything right? I don't think so.
So do you see things changing, or do you see things going backwards?
In a lot of respects, I see things going backwards. But again, I think that's because of white fear. And I've talked about this before when you've had me on. I think a lot of that is about the fear of what Roland Martin calls the browning of America. When you look at the fact that by 2040, statisticians have told us that this country will no longer be primarily white, that you will have a BIPOC majority, or it at least will be a mixed race or Hispanic majority by that year. So looking at that, folks are thinking they're losing something. So why not try to roll back the clock and say, we no longer need affirmative action. We no longer need any type of DEI. We are going to challenge what is being taught in your history classes. We're going to ban certain books. We're going to do all of these things to make it more palatable for the folks that feel like they're losing some last grip or bastion on whiteness that exists. So I think that is part of what you're seeing. But I think the other part of that is invigorating a group of young people who, for lack of, they've lived in luxury. And I'm talking about my generation too. I didn't have to go out and march as much as your father did. I didn't have to march as much as you did. In a generation, I lived with these things being normal in my lifetime. I can point to my yearbooks in all of the public schools that I attended, and I can say, oh, that's Sarah. She was my white friend. This is that person. We were all together. So it was no black water fountain, white water fountain. It was more subjective when it came to racism as I've grown up. And if you think about it, I'm 40, so I'm an ex-Ennial kid. My nephews and folks that come behind me, they have no concept of what it is. But when you think about it, we have to fight for these rights. They come in different iterations in every generation. So we've been fighting the same situations. They've just changed every 20 or so years. We've had to change what it is, what the it is, but it's that same thing. It is the underlying racism. Yes, we have to fight against extreme capitalism, if you will, all of those things. We're fighting against those things and what the new iteration of them is it now. So racism hasn't gone anywhere. It's just been reinvented over time and repackaged into something else. Now it's an assault on DEI. Now it's, the banning of books and all these other things, whereas it was more in your face. And, it was Black people have a school, white people have a school back then, but it's the same thing because we've resegregated our schools. That's a whole different conversation. I won't even go there, but just talking about the things that we need, we've seen that we have to fight for these things every generation. And I think that's waking a lot of younger people up to engaging in the fight and understanding, oh, it's not gone. The civil rights movement is not over. No, it was never over. It's just a different segment, different issue that we have to keep fighting for.
Attorney Janice Mathis, what do you see? Because you come out of Rainbow Push, the National Council of Negro Women. You've worked with Reverend Jesse Jackson. You've worked with Dorothy Height. You've worked with Dr. Janetta Cole. I mean, so many people who have seen so much. I mean, more than 100 years of experiences you have worked with, and you're in the modern day. I mean, what do you see? Do we need these special protections? So, as we come into this election season and we start looking at the things that we really, 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 the asks that we should be having is, do we need special protections? What do you think?
Absolutely, we do. And I can't envision a time when we won't need them because the virus of racism sometimes recedes into the background when times are good and the economy is flourishing. But then at other times, like a latent infection, it shows its ugly head again. And if you look at U.S. history over time, there have always been periods of relative progress and then longer periods of regression. And we're in one of those periods of regression right now. You ask me what my laundry list is. I want the John Lewis Freedom Voting Rights Advancement Act. I want the Freedom to Vote Act. I want the power to sue under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act restored. I want to end child poverty. I want to guarantee that there's enough public housing for people who can't afford housing in the free market. I learned earlier this week that HUD Secretary Marsha Fudge, who put 1 million first-time home buyers into homes, is resigning from the cabinet. Who
No.
will replace? Yes,
Whoa, I didn't know that.
it happened today. Who will replace her? And what will their mandate be? And how committed will they be? My list is long, but I want to point out something about the DEI situation. And I know we're going to talk about that in more depth later. We got very exercised and disturbed because a woman's right to reproductive freedom was reversed after 50 years of Roe v. Wade. But the case that underpins the attacks on DEI stem from an 1866 Civil Rights Act that was adopted because the 13th Amendment was an imperfect end to slavery. And so they came back the very next year. The radical, so called radical Reconstruction Congress came back the very next year to say, no, you must also give them freedom to contract. They must have freedom to work for wages, them being people of African descent who have been formerly enslaved. By my count, that's a 178-year precedent that is being overturned. There are cases that explicitly say that this Civil Rights Act, Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Act, is there to remediate the harms of enslavement. And so we've got a long list, a long laundry list of things that need to be attended to. I'm optimistic. I guess I came up in the Keep Hope Alive School of Activism. And so I think that where there is life, there is hope. But let's not fool ourselves about the quantity and the organization that it's going to take to recover some of what we've lost.
Hmm. Attorney Mark Fancher, do we need special protections in 2024 America, in the post Obama America, in the post racial America, in the America that John Roberts sees, where racism is not the issue that it was 50, 60 years ago, let alone 100 years ago?
Well, as an academic question, certainly, we're certainly vulnerable and exposed to many dangers that require protection. But I think that we are engaging in self-delusion if we believe that government is here to protect anybody other than the oligarchy that controls it. If we really reflect on history and look at how things have unfolded in this country, the average person, the average worker of whatever race, it has always been an individual along with the masses of other people just like him or her, who are there to be managed and exploited for the benefit of those who really control this country. For a long time, they were managed and exploited as workers in plants and factories across the country that manufactured things that made the wealthy wealthier. And when it got to the point where it was possible for them to increase their margins to make larger profits by exporting all of these jobs to places where they could pay far less, then they certainly did it without considering protecting any workers whatsoever, leaving all of these people completely defenseless economically and otherwise. These were also people who constituted a market to which these people would sell things. And when there was no natural demand, then they would manufacture a demand. Once they sold all of the toothbrushes that they could sell, then they created electric toothbrushes and somehow convinced people that they needed them, even if they really didn't. And in more recent times, they've come up with all kinds of electronic gadgets and doodads and things that they've told people that they have to have. People who were perfectly fine with vinyl records and had extensive collections of them had to replace all of them with compact discs. And then as soon as they replaced them with compact discs, then they had to go to a different technology. And then when they couldn't think of anything else to force people to buy, then they went back to selling the vinyl records again. So it's a big game. And then ultimately, what they have done in this country is to conclude that because people don't have jobs anymore and they don't have disposable income and they no longer constitute a viable market, then forget them. We'll go and we'll market all of this stuff to people in other countries. And so it's a big game. we can't look to government and make demands or requests of them and have a realistic expectation that they're going to respond in a way that is actually useful. And when we're more specific and we talk about people of African descent in particular, we're worse off than even white workers who've been exploited and oppressed because we were brought here against our will, not for the purpose of contributing to the development of this country or participating in it, but to provide work and labor at no cost. And when we were no longer in a position to do that because of our struggles and resistance, when we overcame and conquered the system that had kept us in that condition, then we had really outlived our usefulness. We really had no purpose in being here anymore. And so the question has always been, what do you do with them? They've done a number of things. They shoved us into urban areas that they at one time called ghettos, and now they call the hood. And then when we started to burn those down, then they said, well, we better put them in a place where we can control them better. So they started incarcerating us at huge rates where we were more easily managed and controlled. So for a population like ours to say that, we are demanding this or requesting it and having a realistic expectation that we're going to get a response, as I said, is really self-delusion. And I see it in a more particular way in the work that I do. I practice civil rights law, and I can't speak to the experiences of other lawyers who do this type of work. But what I have noticed over the nearly 40 years that I've been doing this is that when I file civil rights lawsuits that involve racial discrimination, and I invoke the so-called protections that are available in the Civil Rights Act or in other statutes, then I know, and I've learned from experience, that I better not rely on that to get relief for my client. That I also have to include claims in that lawsuit that do not involve or do not allege racial discrimination, because the courts consistently, in my experience, have a real hard time reaching the conclusion that there has been racial discrimination. They'll rule in my favor with respect to other claims. If I say that they were retaliated against for having alleged racial discrimination, if I want to make allegations about due process violations, if I want to allege defamation, I can bring all kinds of claims. But if it comes down to the question, was there racial discrimination, they have a real hard time doing that. The only time that they will do it is when you box them in with smoking gun kinds of evidence where somebody actually used the N-word or did something like that, and they just have nowhere else to go. They do not like to rule in a way that concludes that there has been racial discrimination. So I don't know that even if those things are available, that we can count on those in government or in the courts or any place else to actually use them in a way that's going to protect us. And I ultimately think that we are going to have to go where I see our community moving, the direction that they're moving in intuitively or instinctively, and that is toward independent institutions. We have had experience with our children having been gobbled up and chewed up at predominantly white universities for a while, and the students themselves know that if they want an education, if that's the objective, if that's what they want, then they're going to have to go to an HBCU to get it if they're going to have a positive and productive educational experience. That extends to other aspects of our lives. I don't know that we're going to have healthy and productive kinds of experiences in any aspect of life in this country unless and until we have our own institutions that we control and that we can use to protect ourselves. And so I think that to the extent that we're not making plans for that, that we're not actually moving in that direction, then we really need to, because I don't think help is coming from government or anybody else who's supposed to be in charge of listening to us and responding to the demands that we make.
Well, I believe it's Dr. Cheryl Giudice. has written a book that's controversial. She did her graduate work at Northwestern University, and Attorney Mathis, State Representative Myers, uh, and Attorney Fancher, she found out something very interesting. She looked around and she saw the black girls were walking in on around the campus in clusters, and that they were in the dorms on Friday night. So they were always out with each other while the black guys were out having a good time. They were dating interracially, blah, blah, blah. And she said, I have concluded if you're going to go here, you need to be open to dating interracially. And what a very dear friend of ours, one of those prominent educators in the history of the United States, I will say this, Dr. Mary Frances Berry, when I was on my way to college, people knew that I'd been accepted at all these great universities. And she said, she went to my mother, she came to my mother, she said, Jackie, where's Santita going to go? And my mom said, Howard. She said, thank God. This is in 1981. And my mother said, whoa, you're about the only person in your group who's saying that. Even though my daughter had a horrific experience in a Harvard interview. She said, I don't care. I would like to see Santita date when she goes to college. And I'd like for her to have an experience where she comes out not doubting her abilities, where she just competes, does her thing, and goes on. And I'm just trying to figure out when this turn took. I mean, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to you, Mark, because I remember when Reagan this is before I could vote. I remember when Reagan went into office, it struck, you wouldn't know this, State Representative Myers, but when he was elected, we said, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing that can ever happen to us. Ronald Wilson Reagan, 666. I mean, because one of his opening events was in Philadelphia, Mississippi. I mean, there is no bus station there. There is no train station. There is no airport, for heaven's sake.
No, but he did it on purpose because Neshoba County, Mississippi, I know it well. So,
okay,
yeah.
where they found the bodies of Goodman, Schwerner, and Shane. He did it for that reason, and you were horrified, but he didn't care. And I'm trying to figure out, when did this? When did you have to legally switch strategies, Attorney Fancher?
Oh,
when racism became the nasty word. You can't mention that.
Oh, I think that's always been the experience.
Okay.
I don't, and it hit me hard right out of the gate. So it's something I've always been aware of, and I think maybe for a while I had hoped that this could be reformed, that it was something that could change over time. But after a while, you see that it's really sort of hardwired into the system, and I think we all have part of the management of our people has had to do with creating expectations that are not grounded in reality. So that, before the civil rights movement, during the period of Jim Crow, we had no expectations that we would be welcomed into this system or into the mainstream society. And so we created our own institutions. We did everything that we had to do to protect ourselves and to protect our communities. But with the efforts to desegregate came expectations that we will now integrate, and that somehow I think we projected onto the larger population the sense of justice that we have, and presumed that if they could see just how unjust everything is in this country, how we've been treated, then they will have an epiphany, and that they will welcome us into the family of the U.S. family, and we'll all hold hands and have a good time. And that's never been anything that's part of their thinking or their consciousness. And I'm not sure that it ever will be, because white supremacy is a permanent and stubborn thing. I think it would really require mass psychotherapy to really purge it, maybe. and that's a big maybe. So I think we this is not anything that's new. It's been there and it will be there. And it's the only question is how are we going to deal with it?
Well, I mean, that is the question, Attorney Mathis. How do we deal with it?
Well, I'm sitting here listening to Mr. Fancher. I too practice civil rights law in the 11th Circuit of all places. And I agree
Now,
with
why do
you
you say the 11th Circuit of all places for those of us who are not
because
legal eagles like the two of you?
it is either the most conservative circuit or the second most in the country.
Mm.
4, 5, and 11 are where you're going to have the worst time trying to prove racial discrimination. And I too, like you, would layer on other claims, retaliation, maybe some gender discrimination, Americans with Disabilities Act, in order to make the point. I think when you talk about black institutions, led and controlled institutions, I agree with you. And I think that is why you see that this generation of college students prefers HBCUs.
Mhm.
There are all kinds of studies that show, and even in my own family and among my own friends, they are not enamored of going to large white institutions because they know that Howard and Hampton and A&T and FAMU can provide a quality education and not suck all the life out of their souls.
Mm.
So I think there is that, and I think that we should be careful about undermining the institutions we do have. And I mean, the Christian churches, whatever you think of them, they are gathering places. They have the potential to aggregate capital. They don't always do it effectively, but they have that potential. And certainly we do control them. And maybe I'm being swayed by the fact that I just got back from Delta Days at the nation's capital where 1,500 black women are planning to storm the Capitol tomorrow.
Ooh.
And they will get some response. It may not be what we need or all that we want, but they'll know that the ladies in red were there and they've been there since 1913. So I think I, I'm sort of caught between reality, having been in them Southern courtrooms where I was the first black lawyer that many of the judges had ever seen in a courtroom,
Goodness gracious.
and the demoralizing effect of making our people believe that they don't have any agency. Yes, racism is real, it's institutional, it's a permanent part of the American landscape, but you still have to keep hope alive. Because otherwise, what do people have to live and strive for if you say to them, your government doesn't matter, your institutions don't work? What is the motivation to continue to persist? Why do you keep practicing civil rights law? If that's the case, you sound like a very smart guy that you would have found another way to make a living by now. But there must be some motivation that says to you, if I do it well enough, if I do it cleverly enough, I can make a difference. And I think we stymie our own progress to the extent that it occurs when we don't admit that possibility.
Well, that's actually not my mindset. What the way I think of it is
That's what
this.
it sounded like.
Oh, I know. I'll explain because it's not a frame of mind that many people have, and that is that I don't see any hope for the system. That's why I'm out to destroy it. Uh, but I do think that as part of that effort, Black people are involuntarily forced into two struggles that go on at the same time. One is a struggle for liberation, and that does contemplate revolution. But there is also a parallel struggle for survival, and that is the question of how do we survive long enough to actually bring down the system. And so for me, the law practice that I pursue is focused and has no expectations that it's going to accomplish anything other than to facilitate the struggle for survival. So that when people are victimized, when they're discriminated against, when they're harassed or beaten by police, when school children are expelled, all of those kinds of things, those are the kinds of cases that I deal with. And I do it for the purpose of trying to make sure that people stay in the fight, keeping them, living from day to day, maintaining, but with no expectation that through this work, that it is going to bring about the kind of a society that I would really like to see. That kind of struggle has to take place outside of the legal arena,
Well,
but
when
it's
you
a
say,
necessary one anyway.
well, let me ask you this: when you say that you want to destroy the system, what do you want to replace it with? Because I think that people need to understand that you're not really just trying to like deconstruct, but you want to reconstruct. At
Yeah,
least that's my understanding.
no, that's correct, and I think that I would not be the final person to determine that. I don't have dreams of that type of power. I think that's a decision that the people would have to make. That's the democratic ideal with a
Mm-hmm.
small d. But I do think that whatever we would collectively try and build would be something that would take into account the fundamental flaws that are the basis for the country that we live in. We're living on territory that was stolen, from indigenous peoples. That's a huge injustice that can't go. That we can't allow that to just not be dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
We are benefiting from collectively as people who live in this country from the product of labor of people who were not paid for it and who were kidnapped and taken away. These kinds of things, these historical injustices have to be taken into account when we're trying to build something new. I think that one huge flaw, and I think that it is the cause of constant pain and agony for so many, is that power and wealth is concentrated in the hands of just a very few people. This country, it makes no sense for people to be homeless, for people to be hungry, for people to not have health care in a country like this one, which has so much in the way of wealth and resources and opportunities. And so I take my cue on the most basic level from the way that Jesus and his followers existed and the way that the first Christians existed. The Bible says that there were no poor among them because everything that people had, they shared it out. They made sure that everybody had what they needed to eat. They made sure that everybody had a place to live. And even though they, in many ways, lived in the shadow of an empire not unlike the one that we live in, they just basically took their mindset was we're ignoring it. If Caesar wants our taxes and he wants these little pieces of metal that they mint, he can have them. But what we're going to do is we're going to take care of ourselves. We're going to love each other. We're going to make sure that we provide for each other, and we're going to worship our God. And that's the end, that beginning and the end of that. And so, I think this is a lot easier to do than people think it is. I don't think he was being facetious when Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael, as many know him, uh, was asked the question, well, what do you do about poor people? He said, well, the problem with poor people is they don't have any money. He said, give them some money.
You have been nodding in assent to a whole lot that's been said, State Representative Lakeisha Myers. What's resonated with you?
I think listening to both Attorney Mathis and Attorney Fancher have that moment and talk about realities and possibilities is something that inspired me in that moment, because you hear both of these lawyers talking about the work that they do, but then also talking about stretching the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even though I would ask Attorney Fancher in that particular respect, how can utilizing, even though I know you can't use the master's tools to free yourself, it's not going to work, but trying to utilize the government structure that we have now and push forward some of the things policy wise that we want to see in our ideal way of living, how can we push forward even within the structure that we have to kind of tear down the house from the inside out? Is kind of my workaround and my understanding of that. And similar to what Attorney Mathis said, talking about keeping hope alive, it's the inside part of it with trying to, we were talking before the show, Santita, you were talking about becoming that permanent underclass and having a mentality. And then when you talk about what Mark talked about with automation and understanding the government does what's best for itself most of the time. So looking at it from that perspective of if employment is an issue, then we need to start creating the jobs that we want to see. So that looks like investment in small business to me. So that was what I was working through in my head, understanding that, and then also understanding that Black folks got to produce more than we consume. So that was the other part that I started going to in my mind. But then also teaching, because I'm a teacher, by trade, looking at it as, how do you teach somebody how to think outside of the box? Even when you may go to an institution that's a government institution, and it may not be the best place or the best teacher, or you may not have the best book, but you still have the ability to learn something and utilize that to your advantage to then translate that into something that can help you do more for your own people. So all of this was kind of going in my head at the same time, and understanding that both of them, I think, are saying the same things, but trying to put that vision together. So that's what I look at it as, what is how to move forward with that kind of message, and how to do that in a tangible form, from a law perspective as writing a law, or looking at that, what to press for with with government, but then also from the people perspective, the one-on-one, the how do you deal with that, how do you bring the church into the fold? Ms. Mathis talked about churches being one of our greatest institutions. I think they are. Sometimes you have to overcome fear of what that institution can do. Some larger churches have done it quite well, but they've become manufacturers of jobs and product, and housing. They provided housing, by creating the structures necessary to do that. I think if we utilized our institutions more, we could possibly get closer to what Fancher was talking about.
Yeah, and I think it is possible to do all of that. I think that's what's critical is the mindset of all of us when we do whatever it is that we do. If our mindset is that we're going to use our opportunities, our employment, our trade, our skills, whatever it is, if we're going to use it in the way that we've been directed to use it for the objectives that we've told that we should have, look out for yourself, get a big house, make sure you do whatever you got to do to keep your job. If we're going to do that, we get nowhere. But if we have our own plan where we've made a decision, okay, we got Lakeisha Myers in the legislature, and so what she can accomplish for our bigger plan is to get this bill passed, and to get this done and get that done, and that'll work in tandem with this lawsuit that's going on over here in order to advance us to this direction. And then we got Santita Jackson on the radio, and so she can help us to get the word out to the people. And so if we're thinking strategically like that, then we move. But if we've got a bunch of Negroes who get into these positions and they say, I got my job, I got my
they
thing.
say, I don't do politics a lot of times.
Yeah, I'm gonna do what I gotta do. I'm not thinking about the rest of y'all. I can make it, the rest of y'all can make it. Then we get nowhere. So it's really a question of how much we have a vision and a plan for how we're going to collectively accomplish that vision, using the opportunities that the system provides us. If we do it right, one day the system just looks up and says, "What happened?"
Yeah. Because this collective thinking, Attorney Mathis, is what we have to do. When you go to these cultures where people, what do they say? If you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go together. We go to other countries and that are so-called developing countries, the old world, if you will, and they don't have individual plates. They might have a cup. Well, the cup might be shared, but put the food in the middle of the group. You make sure you have clean hands, and everybody's eating at the same time, and everybody gets enough. Now, people can call it socialism, communism, whatever. I just call it just please. I know when my mother had a chicken and she had one more child, as my mother said, it didn't mean, she said, it didn't mean that I had too many children. I just needed to cut up the chicken and maybe make some more rice. You know, she said, who am I going to put back? What do you want me to do? She said, when your father and I had each of you, we couldn't afford any of you. Who do you want me to put back? And she said, we made it and we're all right. I mean, so just for each of you, because I mean, now, I mean, because it's not, America has not figured out certain lessons, everybody, because the Florida legislature just passed a law banning water breaks. Wait a minute, what is it? Water breaks? These are people working outside. Cooling measures, recovery periods, posting or distributing materials informing workers how to protect themselves, and requiring, get this, first or emergency responses. I mean, this is like where we are right now. And a shout out to my grandmother Gertrude in heaven, because she was one of those workers who worked in the heat in Florida and throughout South and Central America and the Caribbean, because in the 30s and 40s the borders were porous and she was poor, and then she was orphaned and she had to make it. You know, I mean, what is going on with us, Attorney Mathis? And I've got about 5 more minutes for everybody, so we can, I guess, close things out and then move on to the second hour, because we're going to be continuing this conversation. Attorney Mathis?
Well, when I think about what we can do, I think about the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. They're doing a campaign this spring and summer about, they call it Buy Back the Block.
Mm.
So often when we get to a certain level of financial so-called independence, the first thing we want to do is move out of the neighborhoods that created us and nurtured us and go live among people who are not our natural allies.
Mm.
A small example, my sister practices law in Greenville, South Carolina. And a few years ago, we decided that rather than paying rent someplace, we would buy a small building where she could practice.
Mm.
Well, that building has appreciated in value. Now it's located between a brand new hospital and a brand new baseball stadium.
Mm.
So it has appreciated significantly. And my niece, who's studying to be some kind of doctor at Howard, says that that is her reparations. I think
Mm-hmm.
that mindset of investing in our own communities makes a lot of sense. You know, if you look at some years ago, I think working for your dad, Santita, we looked at where Apple store. We love Apple products,
Mm-hmm.
iPads and iPhones and I this and I that. Do you know that not in any major city in the United States is an Apple store located in any community where Black folk predominate?
Absolutely.
Why, why are we still buying Apple products?
Mm-hmm.
We spend $2 trillion a year. Why are we not insisting that we spend as much of that as we can with each other so that we build capacity? Why don't we all have accounts at Black-owned banks, for
Mm-hmm.
example? It's that kind of self-help that I think would benefit us, collective economic enterprise. I'm encouraged to some extent by the small resurgence in labor organizing. I know labor unions got all kinds of problems, but there is a collective strategy of us banding together to say to capitalists, yeah, you're on one side of the bargaining table, but we're bringing the power of X number of employees to that table to demand decent wages and working conditions. Why do California and New York have the same number of senators as Mississippi and Connecticut? That's not a democratic premise. We should be fighting to get rid of the electoral college. Why are we going into an election talking about 6, 8, or 10 states will decide the outcome of it, when the last several elections, a majority of American people, Black, white, Native, and others, outnumber those who won? I think there are some things around the margins that we can do and press for that will make the outcomes better for our people. I
Hmm.
agree with you. We got the same goals, but not necessarily the same tactics.
Mm. Attorney Fancher, I've got 1 minute for you.
I think that consciousness continues to grow, if not through deliberate effort, then through experience. And I have suggested or implied that I lack hope. I've never lost hope in our people, because they continue to move forward and upward in spite of everything. I mean, it's one of the most phenomenal and amazing things in the history of humanity, for a people to have been to the very depths of what they could possibly experience in the life experience, and for them to still have their heads held high and to continue to march forward. And so we'll work it out. I have great faith both in God and our destiny, and we will prevail. And as a man greater than myself said, we shall overcome.
Amen to that. Got 1 minute for you. Well, I actually under a minute. Wisconsin State Representative Lakeisha Myers.
Can I just say ditto to what Fancher said?
Absolutely. Well,
I will say,
I will say this. As we move on to the second hour, and I'm so glad that you all are going to be there. I'm sorry that Attorney Fancher, I'm glad he has to go back to work because we do need him. The fact is, Dr. King mused aloud to Harry Belafonte toward the end of his life. He said, I wonder, he said, the fight to desegregate America was the right fight. All of these fights in which we've engaged, getting our voting rights, civil rights, fair housing, all of it, that's important. So, but I'm wondering now if I have put our people in a house on fire.
we just got to become firemen now. That's it.
Well, yeah, he said, but we have to, that means we also have to change our value system. See, because it can't be okay for anyone to be denied water, a rest break. I mean, and we've got to change our thinking about where it is that we need to go. Number one, we have to get connected to God, and that's going to change everything. I really do believe when we reconnect to God, because God is going to show us the way, and God's going to show us who and what and how we need to be, and that's it. So I think that we can get there. Love you, Attorney Mark Fancher, for always yanking us back to the moral center. I love it and appreciate it. And we thank God for you. And thank God for you as you do that in your legislative space. Hey, everybody, stay right here for the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show. Click the link for the second hour. We'll be right back in a minute. Here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.